Hi, welcome back to BookTube with Jenny Luez. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, ring the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And let's begin. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing a book called And She Was by Cindy Dyson. And before I read the cover copy to you, I want to introduce this as a challenge for us all. Let's create a book tag around all 50 states. Start with the state you're in. Read a book about your state. For me, that's reading a book about and within and from an author that was born and raised in the state of Alaska. Now, while this author, Cindy Dyson, has moved out of Alaska and now lives in Montana, she was born and raised in Alaska. It's important to know where you're living, the culture, the history, and the question of, do you belong there? The 50 state book tag is for you to pick up a book, one from each state. And as you read about that state or a fictitious tale that takes place there, that when you do your review, you just give a nod to the 50 state book tag. And let's see which one of us can check all the boxes of all 50 states the fastest. Ready, set, and go. And She Was is a book that takes place on Unalaska. Evidently, there's a bridge that connects Unalaska to Dutch Harbor. And so this book takes place on both of those islands. The cover copy reads, "There are places that can remake you, slippery, gray places. Places that hold their secrets in the fog and whisper them on the wind. And when Brandy, a floundering, trashy, Latin-spewing cocktail waitress, finds herself drifting across the line between the ordinary world and just such a place, something fearsome and beautiful happens. Something changes." Sweeping across centuries and into the Aleutian Islands of Alaska's Bering Sea, And She Was begins with a decision and a broken taboo when three starving Aleut mothers decide to take their fate into their own hands and survive the devastation of Russian conquest. The shadow of their heroic and tragic decision reaches forward across the generations, and as cultural upheavals undulate through the Aleutian chain, their descendants are willing to risk even more as the gold rush and World War II internment threaten their people's survival. 250 years later, by the time Brandy steps ashore in the 1980s, Unalaska Island has absorbed their dark secret, a secret that is both salvation and shame. Brandy doesn't know why she's there. She's too old and too smart to be drifting so close to the edge of the known world. As usual, she is following a man with curly hair and no long-range goals. She takes a job slinging drinks at the notoriously dangerous Elbow Room, studies Aleutian history, learns to ride a motorcycle, and with a practiced psyche, avoids thinking about her withered past and her abandoned future. She is fighting her own battle for survival, a battle she does not even recognize. But the island's secret follows her, and the odd bathroom graffiti, the old Aleut women who hike in the night, the unexplained deaths clouding the island, and the enigmatic smile of a young Aleut woman sketched centuries before. Brandy begins to pay attention. She begins to long for her life to change. In a tense interplay between past and present, And She Was explores Aleut history, taboos, mummies, conquest, survival, and the seamy side of the 1980s in a fishing boomtown at the edge of the world. It leaps across time and culture to a lost woman who more than anything needs to understand the gray shades between heroism and evil, between freedom and bondage, between this place and the rest of her life. This book was a very heavy read. I give it 3 stars because Brandy, who the cover copy admittedly says is trashy, and creates this backdrop of trash that's unfortunate and otherworldly to me. Now, I understand that some of us grew up on the right side of the tracks, and some of us grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. And the underbelly of society, the trashy aspect, is not something that resonates with me. It's not to say that I'm ignorant of its existence. It's just a very big turnoff that an entire book would present so much of the underbelly of society, so much of the detritus that I don't necessarily want a spotlight shown on for an entire book's read. I don't want to necessarily read about the drug culture or drinking in excess or giving yourself away in order to obtain cocaine. These are things that even if I'm knowledgeable about, that I know go on, I don't necessarily need to read all about it, if that makes sense. So when you have an entire book that is showing you the seedy side of life, from the colorful language used to the scenes of substances being used, to the aftermath when people are drunk to the point of passing out or wetting themselves. These are things that I don't know that any of us really need to read. That being said, And She Was redeems itself through the Aleutian history shared. I found the historic aspects of this book riveting. From the names the author chose of the characters she represented to the picture of the Aleutian woman and what her Mona Lisa smile means. That the woman has secrets, she holds power, where others may view her as subservient or less than, she actually is looking down on them. She holds more power than they could ever know or imagine. It's really important for me, as someone that came into Alaska due to her husband's job, that I'm cognizant of the Native culture that surrounds me, that I begin to learn about it, to delve into it, to respect it, to understand it as best as I can. And the Aleuts, the natives of the Aleutian chain, are a native population of Alaska that up until reading And She Was unknown to me. Just like the lower 48 states has different tribes of Indians, so too is the native population in Alaska separate and different. And they have different names associated with them. Tlingit and Haida, Eskimo, Aleut, and I'm sure there's others as well that I simply maybe don't know how to say or am still unaware of yet today. I very much appreciated and loved the historic aspect that then gets brought forward into 1986, where the bulk of the present day text takes place. To see how history and stories are passed down and how they affect people, both those who can trace their history back centuries to a certain location, time, and place, as well as those who have immigrated that don't have the same length of history, but each needs to come to know and recognize themselves. It was a really beautiful intertwining of historic to present day, and each layer of the history was woven into the 1986 reality, where the sin aspect of the book, sin upon sin upon sin upon sin, falling into temptation over and over and over again, habitual patterns of behavior that just don't help anyone to move forward or succeed, but in fact make them stuck. That was all very disheartening. And I didn't like being immersed in that world. It was depressing. And yet there were glimmers of hope and glimmers of power, glimmers of strength. Because if nothing else, no matter what cultural background you're from, women must be strong. It's interesting where peoples and their cultures perhaps have been conquered, that men may be emasculated, where they are not able to then protect their loved ones or fulfill their manly roles and the way in which they're used to as providers because they've been put under somebody's thumb or murdered or put into slavery or bondage. It's the women, though being attacked and slaughtered, that are still the ones that can maintain their caregiver roles, who can apply what a woman brings to the table in a way as to adapt to whatever's before her, where her strength isn't stripped, but in fact, she's able to step into her strength and her power even more so because she understands that the male population isn't there anymore to provide that layer of protection. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't. So women, instead of cowering in fear, learn to adapt and to still bring to the table what they have innately within them. So oftentimes, when a tribe is conquered, a territory is taken, it's the women that are able to recover and pivot perhaps faster. It was a really interesting take on society, anthropology, sociology. This book is very deep. I just took away points because of the seediness and the language and the aspects that I, again, didn't want to immerse myself in. There's reasons I don't live that way, and I don't necessarily want to live that way through a book either then. However, it's good to also broaden our horizons, open our eyes, understand truths of specific areas, especially within states that we find ourselves living in. And where ignorance is sometimes bliss, it's also good to understand and see where others may perhaps come from. Some of the most touching scenes for me in this book had to do with Brandy and her interactions with her alcoholic father, learning some of her backstory as to why she is floundering, why she is finding it hard to find her place, why it's taking her so long to grow up, to follow her own path, to claim her own sense of power, to not be a victim but a victor. Two of the biggest takeaways for me. When Brandy is looking around her at the patrons of the bar, sees the disparity between her blonde hair and white skin versus that of the Aleuts with their long, black, straight, gorgeous hair, tanned skin, that she just has this epiphany and a realization that she doesn't fit in. She doesn't belong there. And for a long time, while I have struggled to belong in Alaska and to fit into my surroundings, and having lived in the state on and off for 9+ years, with the last of those being 7.5 to 8 years of concurrent back-to-back living here, I have wanted to find my place, and yet have always felt a bit of resistance to that. In part, that's because I was not born and raised here. In part, that's because I'm a white woman moving in. In part, it's because I don't know what I don't know about the history, the time, the place, how the history foreshadows the current living situation we find ourselves in. And well, for the majority of my life, I have never had any problems with interpersonal relationships involving others that are different than myself. It is an interesting dynamic, one that is unique to Alaska, based on the natives that you talk to. The majority of the native population is welcoming, beautiful, loving, kind. And yet there's also part of the population that is bitter and does not like that a person that is white like me is living on their land. So while the Aleuts in the book reacted to Brandy in a way as to both inform her and educate her, while being kind to her, by the end of the book, they also told her that she needed to leave. So early on, she looks around and she can feel and sense and understand and know that she doesn't belong there. And by the end of the book, that's confirmed to her by the local native population to say, you need to leave. You don't belong here. Truth spoken in love is not always easy to receive. Sometimes it's a harsh reality. As for me, hearing Brandy say it, having the natives tell her as well, I also, as soon as I read Brandy's words of, I don't belong here, I was like, yes, that's the root of how I've been feeling. That despite the years of my living here, I don't belong here. This isn't my home. And that's okay. It's good to have that epiphany, that knowledge, that understanding. It's wonderful to be able to sort it out and come to the conclusion that really, I don't belong here. And when I went home this past spring to Michigan, well, those are my people. That is where I belong. So while Alaska has been a grand adventure, I can't see it being one that lasts forever because I don't belong here. So while I had a personal epiphany similar to the main character in this book, the other takeaway is such a beautiful, powerful, lovely one that sometimes, just like with yellow crocus, sometimes there is a nugget of information passed from one culture to another, from one person to another, that normally the story is retained within that specific ethnicity or specific culture, but every now and then it gets shared across cultural lines and it becomes something that is powerful for everyone. And so Brandy does walk away from the Aleutian Islands with these powerful words. A mother takes the hands of her daughter. Say you will remember what I am going to tell you. Yes, Mom. I turn her palms up. You hold your fate, your future right here in these hands. They're full. Do you feel it? Do you feel the weight? She sets the girl down and kneels in front of her. Aya, you must remember what I'm going to tell you. Say you will. The girl looks up, surprised by her mother's tone. Yes, Mama. These hands, turning the sand-caked palms upward in her own. In them you hold your fate. And in no one's hands but your own does your future rest. Do you understand? Aya understands only the strange desperation in her mother's voice, only the first notions of fear. But she nods. Yes, Mama. In the years to come, Io will listen to her mother repeat this strange ceremony, the turning up of her palms and the heavy words. But she will not come to understand them until her mother is long gone and the change has blown down upon her like a willy waw. Remember, these hands, in them you hold your fate. In no one's hands but your own does your future rest. Do you understand? Until next time, friends.